Everybody, this is Chris from the Skeleton. I just wanted to record another progress video showing a little bit on the let's call it a change of left brain to right brain. Previous video covered design updates. This update's going to change, cover various code changes, syntax changes, specifically around things like components. So let's get started here. So if you haven't already, you are welcome to come on to the Skeleton repository on GitHub. Check the discussion section, and we have this RFC post pinned at the top of the section. This includes links to things like the overall next proposal, which next represents the next major iteration of Skeleton v3. It also links to prototype and the source for the prototype, covers some of the basic changes, the FAQ, just questions you might have about what this is and how it's working, and just all of those details. A lot of this has been covered in previous videos, so we'll put that to the side and start talking about what's new today. The things that I want to cover today include the new style guide. So you can think of this as the way that we are setting conventions and patterns for how we author and write our components. And so this is very important for anybody, not just contributors, but folks that might want to extend with their own custom components and they're local to their project, that they want to author in the same patterns and fashions that we do our own components. So if you just need a one-off, you want to make sure that it's adaptive and utilizes your theme and kind of uses that same sort of approach that we do, then you can definitely do that. If it gets to a point that you feel like it might be useful for others, you could then take that and contribute that forward to the open source library itself. So first thing I want to show is just this kind of really cool tool that we've kind of come across. It's called Component Party. It just gives you kind of a left and right comparison between two different frameworks. And the reason I want to showcase this first is because one of the first questions, or our main questions we keep seeing coming up since the next announcement, is how are you going to keep parity between different frameworks? If I'm switching from using Skeleton for Svelte and I switch over to React, is it going to feel completely alien? Is it going to feel completely different? Are there new conventions I'm going to have to learn? And the answer to that is no. In most cases, no. We're going to try to keep as much parity as possible and keep this very familiar. So concepts carry across, prop names carry across, that kind of thing. But this tool is really handy if you are somebody that is new to maybe switching from Svelte 4 to Svelte 5 here in the near future. Skeleton v3 or next is going to be built on Svelte 5, so if you are not familiar, I definitely recommend you give this a look so that some of this stuff is familiar to you. But if you also want to see, a comparison between Svelte 5 and React, you can definitely do that to just see like, hey, yeah, I'm doing, declaring state or updating or whatever. There's these patterns that exist in pretty much every component system that exists out there. How do I set state in Vue? How do I set state in Svelte or whatever? Like there's ways to do that. And while they have their own syntax, they do differ. There is a lot of overlap. There's quite a lot of overlap, in fact, in many regards. And so again, I bring this up to let you know that the systems that we are building on top of, they already have a lot of these kind of paradigms established. There's parity between those. It's not always one-to-one, and there will be some gotchas, but just know that we are taking that stuff into account, and we are thinking ahead on that. Now, there are things that are the conventions that we own, and we are creating ourselves from the ground up, and those are things like prop names and the way events are handled and stuff like that. And so, we've put some like high-level details in here on what sort of changes you're going to see. And when it comes to components, the thing that's kind of most at the forefront for most folks is the syntax of the components themselves. What is the tag that you use, and then what is the actual attributes or props that I provide. And so you're going to see there's some detailed work going in here of like, how do we structure our props? How do we name our props? What are the conventions for these? How is that provided? If it's provided and from externally, how do we utilize it inside the template for the component? So on and so forth. Lots and lots of different details here. If you are a details person, you like to see all of those. We've written out this whole proposal and guide here that covers all of this in great detail with code examples and things like that you can come in and see, specific breakdowns for what is this, how does it work, that kind of thing. It's all detailed here. But I do want to showcase, or I do want to kind of talk through some of the high level changes and maybe show a couple quick details just to kind of put some of these things on your radar. Because again, we're showcasing all this stuff very early in the process because we want to build Skeleton for you. And so as part of that, we need to make sure that you understand the direction we're heading and make sure that it clicks for everybody, and obviously get feedback and have folks poke holes and find problems that we've missed or gaps, or the edge cases that we haven't covered. So a couple things that I want to note specifically with components and props here. So there's a few things that you're going to see, such as this kind of idea of base classes. You're going to see some details with like the generic class attribute being kind of removed. And you're going to see, maybe some of the boilerplate if you're a contributor for how much boilerplate is required to create a skeleton component. Some of that stuff going away and minimizing. So super exciting stuff. Just a few bullet points in here. But there's a few things that I want to show, like the way we're kind of approaching props. We're thinking of them in kind of three different buckets or three different categories. Functional props are things like I'm setting an active state on an accordion, or an active, open state or active state, passing an href for a link, or setting multiple if it's something like an input. Those are those ideas of like functional features. There's usually only one of those particular types of props, and they are kind of defined typically once at whatever the highest or parent level of the components are. The next idea is style props. Style props are a concept that we're bringing straight over from Skeleton, but evolving in some big ways. Those are props that you provide utility classes for from Tailwind or from Skeleton. Things like background color or padding or whatever, where you add that prop, you add the utility class as the value, and that affects some portion of your component, right? So those are style props. The final addition is slot props. With Svelte 5, they're providing this kind of new concept or new feature called snippets. Snippets kind of replace conceptually what slots or name slots did for Svelte 4, and so they now work somewhat, at least within the way you're authoring the components, more like a prop, and that's a little bit familiar for anybody that comes from the React world. They'll kind of understand this kind of concept of children. So 3 different sort of categories or flavors of props. Now, style props I want to talk through a little bit more detail just because these are critical. These are like one of the kind of killer features of Skeleton, if you will, in the way we handle this. And so there are some problems and some issues that we've seen since early days with Skeleton. Things that have annoyed us, and made it very difficult for us to author or target particular styles to particular portions of the template. And so if you don't know, your props are typically, your style props are typically something like a background class or margin class or spacing class or something like that. Those are passed in as props, usually at the top level of the component, and then they're shared and passed down the tree into any kind of child elements within that template. And so that in itself would cause some problems, because if you had, say, for example, multiple elements within your template that needed a unique padding provided to them, we couldn't just use that generic padding name, because that would cause some issues. It would be conflict, right? Like you have padding, and it's like, which one goes to this, which one goes to that. And so those are some of the ideas we're just kind of, and the problems we're identifying and working through and things like that. And so what we're doing with style props now is we're going to, again, kind of break this into multiple categories. There's going to be base props. There's going to be property props. That's fun to say. And there's also going to be just a generic set of classes. So these all kind of map to concepts that existed in V2, but just, again, with a little bit of evolution, a little bit of semantics and standardizations that we're looking for. So in the previous version of Skeleton, you would have these like hard-coded styles that were built into the component. And those were sort of like, think of it as like your default styling for the component. So if you have something like, let's go to, let's just grab a random component here. App bar is a good example. So you have something like a background style. You have the spacing between, the items on the left and the items on the right, the spacing between the top row and the middle row. Like those are all default styles that are built into your component, right? But the problem is they're hard coded. They were not necessarily accessible to you. Like we do provide ways for you to access those through these different like individual property classes, where you can change the backgrounds, you can change the borders and paddings and things like that. But it was always limited to the scope of what the values we provided were. If you wanted to really get access and override or clear out and start from scratch from the base settings, the base styles, you couldn't really do that. There was no way to do that. And so what we're going to do going forward is we're now going to provide base styles for every element within the template. And those represent the list of utility classes that we're using to author the defaults for that component. And so by providing these as props, what you get in turn is essentially sort of like a faux headless is what we're calling it. Where the component is not truly headless, it's not completely unstyled, right, from the ground up, and you're required to add all your styles in from the ground up. We're providing those defaults for you, but you can essentially throw those all out and start from scratch if you really want. So there'll be multiple levels. So like at the parent element or child element or another child element, you might have that base class base prop available to provide those. And by setting those, it just by default clears out the options that were there and only uses the classes that you were providing it. So there will be it'll be a little bit more of an advanced feature for most folks. You probably won't want to touch that for most features, but if you need that kind of power user feature to be able to do that, you sure will be able to do that. Next is going to be the properties. These are going to be classes that are things that are very familiar, things like backgrounds, margins, borders, that kind of thing. We're taking that same approach, but again, the parent element, we're just kind of simplifying some of the prop names. So instead of spelling out the word background, we're just going to use the Tailwind convention, BG, just to make it a little bit more familiar and a little easier to remember, just offhand. And so again, it's that 3 levels. The parent element is not prefixed, the child element is, and for every child element within there, it's got its own unique prefix. So this might be like, imagine this was an accordion. You'd have the accordion, that's the parent, it's the wrapping thing, and then this is something like item. Or if this is an avatar, you have the figure, and then you have the image within it, right? That's the child element within inside the template. So that's what I mean when I say a child element. So you might imagine this was something like image background instead of the random word food that we've thrown in here. The last level is kind of one of the cooler parts. In the previous iteration of Skeleton, we have this kind of concept of being able to provide your own sort of arbitrary classes. You can kind of just add a class property or attribute to any component and pass your own arbitrary set of classes in. So we only, however, were limited to do that at the parent level. So if you had an image tag or a child of something deeply nested within the template, this wouldn't access that. You would have to use some kind of weird special Tailwind syntax to kind of reach down through the DOM tree and reach all that. It was just very difficult, very hard. And so now what we're doing is essentially taking that class attribute and providing multiple instances of it. So we're going with probably classes where the name's still kind of in progress. But think of this as like, this is where you extend or you add your own classes on. And so I know that this is kind of weird to hear the names and terms just sort of thrown out. So we've created this nice little diagram that kind of showcases how that's constructed. So if you look at the actual template, like the actual element inside the template, like be that a div or an image tag or whatever, it's going to be constructed in this way. Like whatever base styles that are established for that element, those are the first things passed. Any of the individual style props, so backgrounds, margins, spacing, what have you, borders, those kinds of things, those are going to be provided as well. Those typically represent a single value, so just borders, just backgrounds, just padding, that kind of thing. So there could be multiple of these, and just not just the one. And then finally, classes, that's where you extend or add on your own arbitrary classes. And so in practice, when we're writing the components, we'll leave this prop blank. They won't have any classes there. And it's just for you to append your own externally on the component definition itself, and then just be able to kind of see that, see those things put in place. So if you just want to quickly override some of the base, a single base style, or if you just want to append your own thing, it gives you a really simple syntax to be able to do that. There's some internal stuff here. I'll kind of skim through some of this because this is, again, mostly relevant if you're a contributor. Just we had a lot of boilerplate stuff that we did in order to define our components and props for them in the V2 conventions, and that's just much simpler. And then the other thing is, instead of doing this, like we would do this and we would scaffold this reactive thing, and then we put that all goes out the window, and we just pretty much pass everything down verbatim. So it's just the mental model there is much simpler, and it just works much better in practice. We still handle dynamic props, so if you have like a state that toggles true or false or something like that, and you need to have classes, a set of classes that swaps out between those, we kind of have an established pattern for that using the state rune for Svelte or the use state hook for React, and then just kind of a prefix there to just kind of identify those reactive or those classes that might hot swap out. And then finally, we have the prototype here that we've shared previously. We've updated all of the examples here to utilize the new structure here. So if you're curious to see these kind of conventions in practice, like if we open the Svelte card component, you're going to see, hey, there's that very simple property for that style prop, provided where it's using the short BG name that matches the Tailwind convention, and we're changing the color there. And that's, of course, changing that background color there. We're using functional components like href there. For this very minimalistic card component, we're not using the classes to extend, but I can show you an example of that in the next video. The other thing you're going to notice is that we're using snippets, which are a new Svelte 5 feature. If you're not familiar with this, I definitely recommend you go and look at Svelte 5, look at some of the early proposals, and see that those are essentially like a drop-in replacement for your name slots in the current implementation. If we go look at the component definition itself, you're going to see all of those kind of conventions in play. We have these functional components, functional props. We have all of the root properties for like base styles and things like that. Makes a little more sense to show down here. This is the actual, key and value pairs being put together. So base styles, so we're providing a class there called card. We're providing a base background color, base styling, things like that. And you can see, like, if we jump down here, we can see how all that's being authored. So base is being dropped here, background here, space here, classes here. And again, classes is left empty because that's for you to extend this with your own extra classes that are just added to the end of the list, right? In this case, we have a few child elements. We have a title, an article, and a footer. So you can see all of the props are prefixed semantically for each of those. So when I talk that semantic naming, that's the kind of stuff that I meant. And then we have that kind of last category of props, the snippet props, right, if you will. So that's your title, article, and footer, and that's the actual value that's rendered out as part of the snippet itself and used in the conditionals here. So a little weird if you're new to Svelte 5, but it trust me, it grows on you really quick. It's really nice. Likewise, we show the React equivalent of this. You're going to see some very familiar stuff. You're also going to see some stuff we haven't talked about yet, like the composability of the components, where there's not really the concept of named slots in React. So we have to kind of work around the conventions in React that React provides us. And so what we're doing is following the same pattern that many other UI libraries do, Shadcn, Mantine, etc. These other kind of popular options, is they let you kind of just build these smaller little pieces of the smaller components that are then composed together to make something bigger, so that you have your card title and your card article and your card footer and things like that, and those just take the place of those slots in the Svelte equivalent. Likewise, we have all of the implementation for these in the React component definition, and so you can see a lot of those same conventions carry over here. You can see like the base, the background, the spacing, the classes, all of those are defined, passed straight to the template, just like before, just again, using that same pattern. And if you're kind of curious why we don't prefix the parent element, the reason why is that in most cases, the parent element is going to be one of, if not the only, excuse me, components that you have. And so if you have a background that you need to set here or a background here, like we can just use the non-prefix to those so that we don't have to do card title and then title background and like repeat ourselves and repeat that prefix and that term over and over and over. We can just use the simplified version because these, even though they are children within that kind of parent element, they are still the top level of the template itself. So a little complex there. Definitely read the notes. It'll make that maybe a little bit more clear. The final thing I want to show you here is just, if you haven't already, we do provide, as part of the request for comments post, we do have a link to both the rendered version of the prototype and then also the source code, which looks like this. So if you want to clone this down and take a look at some of these components, you can kind of see how we're constructing and building some of this. I would especially encourage you to go take a look at more complex components like the accordion, because these have utilize a lot more of the settings and things like that. So you can see this is using a padding style prop. It's also using classes because we don't have a prop for border, so we needed to append this and add this ourselves. So just some of the ways we're doing and handling some of those things. You can see how some of the child stuff is being handled, functional props. You can see various snippets being used, snippets to set the toggle icons. Those can be done one time now instead of for each item, which is really cool. So if you want to change and customize these, snippets will allow us to do that. Just some really cool details in there. Definitely go check that out. This video should be appended and attached to a post on the GitHub discussion section for right alongside the RFC. So if you go check the discussion section on our main repo, you'll find the post that has all of this. If you have any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to send our way around these conventions, please. We are actively asking for this. Leave a comment in the post that this video is attached to, or reach out on Discord. We have a Skeleton Next RFC channel on our Discord. Reach out, add your comments, and we will typically respond pretty quick. Other than that, again, hope you like the direction we're heading with this. Some really exciting changes. I know some of this stuff is a little scary because it's new, but I think when you really kind of see it in practice, you're going to be very excited. It's going to solve a lot of the problems many people report with, hey, I can't access this particular style, or I want to, do something unique or custom. I want the styles to be more kind of opt-in if I really choose. I really want to customize a lot further. A lot of that stuff is going to be solved with some of these new solutions we're providing here. So again, please check it out. Let us know what you think. Thank you.